Now, the other day I did a video discussing just how poorly The Acolyte did according to the Nielsen ratings at most weeks or most episodes, outside of the first couple and the last one, that it couldn't even crack the top 10 for new or original shows on streaming services, and that its final episode only got 335 million minutes of watch time, which, when we use the simple formula of dividing watch time by length of episode to get a rough approximation of views, made it by far the least watched finale of any Disney Plus Star Wars show to date. And that, as well as shall we say, a less than warm reception from fans, or a very negative reception from some fans, seemed to make a second season very, very unlikely, even though one was strongly hinted at in that finale, with Darth Plagueis literally popping his head out of a cave, and with the show essentially ending with our two villains staring off into the sunset like heroes. And though, personally, I was already all but positive a second season would indeed never happen, I mean, they spent $180 million on this show, and to be blunt about it, they got no results with it. It didn't move the franchise's needle forward. If anything, it moved it backwards. Not to mention made the Jedi look terrible, and even had the showrunner saying things as crazy as, we should overlook our villains murdering people and try to empathize with them, because that's what Star Wars is all about? Rooting for the murderers? Anyway, quite honestly, I thought there was no chance in hell that The Acolyte would get a second season, but I also thought that it would just kinda quietly go away. That it would be something that they, meaning Lucasfilm, would try not to talk about or bring up ever again. Much like that Rian Johnson Star Wars trilogy that was announced 7 years ago. You just don't mention it anymore, and when asked about it, you say something like, well, it's still being looked at, or the timing just isn't working out, or something else along those lines. You just never confirm that it isn't happening, even though we all know it's not happening. But nope, turns out Lucasfilm has been straightforward this time and closed the door on The Acolyte. They have confirmed that a second season is not currently being considered, which of course has disappointed and or angered the fans or defenders of the show, those who have been begging for a second season on social media with hashtags like Renew the Acolyte, because even they knew the likelihood of a season 2 was pretty low, and in the wake of this news now has them asking how could they do this? How could a Lucasfilm and Disney leave the story hanging like this? It's outrageous, it's unfair. And some are even saying or claiming that this must have something to do with racism and or sexism, that the only reason it's being canceled is because some of the fans who didn't watch it or that were negative towards it are bigots and don't want women or non-white people in Star Wars, you know, the same excuses we've heard before with other projects that have failed. Which always confuses me because I've also been told that the so-called haters are nothing but a loud, angry minority, that the majority of fans are happy with Disney Star Wars. But, the numbers really don't seem to be backing that up. If Star Wars were doing great, if The Acolyte had done extremely well, it would have gotten a second season. It is really as simple as that. So maybe it's time for a bit of a reality check here for some of the fans who have been living in a delusion of sorts, a delusion of grandeur perhaps. Maybe it is time to ask if the people who aren't happy with Disney Star Wars are much greater in number than you perhaps want to admit. That a good portion of this fan base, to say nothing of the average or casual viewer who aren't tuning in anymore, but perhaps a lot of fans, and I do mean a lot, are all but done with Star Wars, or don't care about Disney Star Wars, because it, just hasn't been very good overall. And so, if you are someone who loved The Acolyte and have loved all things Disney Star Wars, maybe it's time to ask yourself if perhaps all these excuses you keep coming up with, if saying it has only been the bigots rejecting Disney Star Wars, if that's not even close to reality. It's just what you tell yourself to explain what has, by and large, been an absolute disaster. That Disney's handling of Star Wars has been nothing short of a disaster. That what was once the largest, most popular, and beloved franchise in history now has become so sad that a new series set in it that features all the hallmarks of Star Wars, the Jedi, lightsabers, and all that, it struggles to crack the top 10 of new shows and doesn't get renewed because so few people watched it. Maybe, just maybe, open your mind to the possibility that the problem isn't the fans of Star Wars who aren't happy and are saying as much. Maybe it's actually the quality of Star Wars itself. That the vast majority of fans don't care about things like race and gender. That is not holding them back from watching or the reason why they criticize it. They have accepted diverse characters in the past and gladly will again, as long as the stories are good, as long as the quality is made a priority over, well, pretty much everything else. And with something like The Acolyte, that does not feel like the case. That is the reason why so many reject something like this show, because it is bad. Period. Simple as that. And yeah, if I'm being fair and honest here, I don't think The Acolyte was the worst thing ever created. It's not great, it's not even good or above average, but it had a few redeeming qualities. Like I've said before, there were a couple good performances and unfortunately some really bad ones. And the lightsaber fights were pretty solid, which is what most people on social media seem to latch onto when they defend the show. They say how amazing the lightsaber fights were, and that, for some reason, that alone made it good, I guess? But shouldn't quality lightsaber fights kind of be the norm? Shouldn't we expect them to always be good in Star Wars? And though, sure, I do love to watch a good saber fight myself, don't get me wrong, but they're not the only thing, or even close to the top thing, a Star Wars show or movie should be judged on. The story itself, the writing, is what needs to be top-notch. And come on, you can't honestly tell me that you think The Acolyte was extremely well written. You can't tell me that it can stand against some of the other shows out there today. You cannot tell me that this is the absolute best Star Wars can be, which is the real problem many fans have. It's not that all these shows have been completely terrible or the absolute worst things ever. Some of them have been okay or even great at times, like Andor. But a lot of them just aren't very good. They're kind of average at best, and if you took them out of Star Wars, or if they weren't Star Wars shows, very few people would watch them or care about them. And I mean, you can't tell me that The Acolyte has virtually any viewership if it isn't a Star Wars show. You can't tell me that is a show that people who didn't know Star Wars going into it were going to watch and say, this is great stuff, I want more Star Wars. If anything, it does the opposite. If The Acolyte was someone's first Star Wars experience, or one of the few things they've ever watched in the franchise, they probably, at best, kind of shrugged their shoulders at it and thought, there are much better shows out there to watch and spend my time and money for a subscription on. Which is the real problem with making shows that are less than the best they can possibly be. They not only lose the fans Star Wars already has in a lot of cases, but they lose future ones too. Star Wars may not be dead, but it is dying or will die if it cannot bring in new fans and keep the majority of the old ones around. And if you're, again, new to the franchise and you watch a couple things Star Wars and they're kind of average at best, if not pretty bad, you are not going to keep coming back for more. You have no reason to be vested in the franchise. You're not going to keep giving it chances just because some people out there on social media seem to love it and say nothing but nice things about it. You're going to question their sanity, if anything. And some fans absolutely do that sort of thing. Some just want to say how fantastic everything Star Wars is, and they even say ridiculous things like, we should be grateful to get any new Star Wars shows at all. Which is the way wrong attitude to have, no matter how much you may indeed genuinely love and enjoy these shows, or how big of a Star Wars fan you are. There's no reason to be grateful for Star Wars when you're paying for it and they're doing it to get your money. And thus another reality you need to wake up to is that Disney doesn't care about Star Wars itself, about the story. Like I've said before, what they spent $4 billion on was the fan base. They paid that for the built-in or guaranteed audience, or the guaranteed customers who will throw their money at them without a second thought. Basically, they paid that money for you, the fan who will love it without question, who will take to social media and do nothing but praise it and potentially lure in others to watch it. And some seem aghast right now that they could ever leave the story of The Acolyte hanging like this. I mean, how could they not finish it when the story was clearly meant to have a second season, if not more. But again, Disney, they don't care if you get the end of the story or not. They only care about how many people are or were willing to pay for it. That is what determines what gets made or not. That is why so many of us fans can and will be so critical. Because we only want them to produce quality shows. We only want to pay for quality, even though, yeah, we love Star Wars and want to consume it as much as possible too. But we are going to withhold our money or offer up some pretty harsh criticism when need be in order to get the best possible Star Wars, both for our money and for the sake of the franchise. And also so they don't view us as something to be taken advantage of just because they own this thing we love. We do not owe them our loyalty. They owe us quality Star Wars, and then we will give them our money. And you know what? If you wanted to get a second season of The Acolyte, if you are someone who is very disappointed right now, you also should have been critical of other Star Wars projects before it. And thus perhaps this would have been made or written better and more people would have watched it and enjoyed it. That is what you don't understand. Just because you like it, you can't just say, well, I don't care if anybody else likes it. I enjoyed it. That's great. But when there's 12 of you enjoying it, they're not going to keep making it. And so, like I've been saying, you just praising anything and everything, you saying you're grateful and that you call other fans names to justify Disney and Lucasfilm's lack of quality, you doing all that, you defending the mega corporation holding what you love hostage for your money and turning on your fellow fans who just won't settle for anything, you now finally get to understand how it feels to be disappointed in Disney Star Wars. Well, that is all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about The Acolyte getting canceled. Are you surprised? Are you happy? Are you sad? Or what? Or you can always tell me what you think about anything or everything I had to say here. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.